Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for Italcementi and Carlo for inviting me. I was thinking, just listening to my colleagues and the whole framing of this event, what a commentary, not just on your 150 years of continuity, but also the fact that you're investing your resources through your foundation in an activity that has education at its core. Which I think we all should, of course, celebrate. Being an ambassador for American capitalism is always a bit of a burden, and certainly not one that I would take on lightly. I am, like my colleague Guido Corbetta, a student of family enterprise, and in thinking about today and reflecting on the comments of my colleagues, I thought I would say a few words about what's happened in the US around family companies, particularly in the larger end of the family enterprise world. As you know, about 35% of the Fortune 500s are controlled by families. And since the financial crisis of '08, families have really begun to pay attention to one thing that they had neglected in the past, which is what makes them special as family enterprises. Many American family-controlled enterprises in the 90s and early 20s endorse the shareholder value model. And in the process of endorsing that model, felt that they went too far in becoming fully so professionalized that they were beginning to lose their soul. So part of what's happened since the '08 crisis is that family enterprises have retaken their identity as family companies and began a very fascinating process of trying to find, just like we've been speaking here at the country level, a hybrid model that begins to integrate preserve their own identity as family enterprises, that allows them to tap that special culture, that special set of ingredients that Guido and others have talked about that makes them unique, while at the same time embracing the dynamism, the meritocracy, the professionalism that comes with a global world and the kind of competitiveness that our colleagues have been speaking about, which is very much a reality. So what are the pragmatic implications of this balance? How do you, in the context of a family enterprise, retain your unique identity as a family company and yet endorse enough of the competitive ingredients you need to be able to continue your growth and to continue your success in a competitive world? There are a few things that I like to share which I think are to this point. First of all, we have talked a lot, and I think the Italcementi example through this conference supports this idea, that families that do this well are able to invest resources in educating their shareholders, their family shareholders. It's not just taken as a given. I like that quote from the Michelin chairman, but I do think it's a little strong. And I'll say why I think it's a little strong. Family owners do need to own their company. They do need to identify with what they own. They need to feel the pride. They need to feel the psychological investment that comes with being a member of the owning family. But part of what you do when you embrace that is in fact tapping a concept similar to what our ambassador from India has said, which is the selfless idea of the collective. Because when you're a member of a shareholder family that really takes governance seriously, you are in fact embracing an identity that commits you to engage in the most important act of governance, I think, when you're an owner of a family enterprise, which is reflecting on what does governance require for being, for effectiveness. What kind of talent do you need on a board of directors, for example? And then the act requires you to think, do I have those skills or don't I have those skills? And if you don't have them, then you either acquire them, meaning you invest in your own development enough so that you can acquire those skills, or you give your authority to someone other than yourself to represent the interests of your family better than you could represent them yourself, which I think is actually quite a courageous act. And not all family members typically embrace that idea. And families that invest in educating their owners create more of a probability that, in fact, the owners will behave with that kind of selflessness, with that kind of commitment to the future, by saying, I don't need to be on the board, but I will put someone other from my family, even though if they might not be from my own branch, who happens to have the skills to represent me better. So it takes a particular kind of maturity to get to that point. So while innovation in governance, I think, is fundamental, and the efforts of Gabriel and his counterparts around the world are absolutely essential, it also takes innovation internally within families to be able to acquire the kind of spirit that creates for effective governance. So governance is not just a tool, is also a mindset in itself, and that you have to put that mindset in people's heads through education, through awareness that a better governed company is not just good for the employees, it's not just good for the customers and the community, it's also good for the family owners that control the family. Now, the other thing that's happened here, and I think that those of us who are in business schools have contributed to this problem, through the 90s and the 2000s, the early years of this century, we sold to our students through MBA programs and executive programs and so forth, a mindset that was very anchored on the shareholder value mentality. And that mindset, I think, ended up creating some of the conditions that led to the Enrons of the world, or the Parmalats of the world here. So part of the issue, I think, has got to come back to us in educational institutions to make us think about what are we teaching the MBAs of the world? How do we educate the future non-family executives to also approach their employment with a mindset that is more akin to the kind of mindset family owners have? Long-term investment growth, value added not just for themselves, but for the customers, the suppliers, the other stakeholders that depend on the well-being of the company. So I think educational institutions really do have to invest in educating not just competent managers, but humanistic managers as well, who are thoughtful about the long-term impact of their own activities in their communities and bring that mindset to the organizations in which they are themselves employed. So I'm often asked, sometimes family companies, in an effort to correct for nepotism, want to bring in executives that are, highly competitive. And in fact, those executives, in my view, often don't succeed in family companies. You need an executive that is extremely competent, for sure, but also has a value mindset that makes that executive's agenda in alignment with the agenda of the owners. So you need to work both ends, not just the owners, but also the hired executives that you bring in. And then finally, I'd like to also close with this fundamental idea that I think is at the core of capitalism. There's a fantastic book that I recommend highly called Familial Capitalism by a historian at Princeton. His last name is James. And he analyzes the role of family in society today and the role that family has played in the very evolution of capitalism, and how today family enterprises become a mediator between the changes that are going on in the marketplace and the changes that the state has to embrace to be able to govern in a more holistic way the kinds of challenges that we have. And one of the points that we are learning about sustainable family companies, which I think speaks to this issue very well, is that managing a family enterprise effectively forces you, the managers, the owners, and all of the stakeholders around the enterprise to learn to live with dilemmas. So it isn't just a matter of embracing a model and solving its problems. It's that every solution brings new problems. So the mindset we must embrace for the 21st century in general, I feel, and family enterprises, when they're well managed, are very good at this, is really learning to find solutions to dilemmas that buy us time until we can get to the next solution and allow for sustainable organic evolution. Let me embrace some of these dilemmas, describe them for you. So for example, how do you create a synthesis between professionalism and nepotism by saying we're going to have nepotistic excellence? What does that mean? It means investing in the development of your owners, so someday you can cherry pick with very great care the best and best educated and most smart of your owners to represent that constituency in the leadership of your enterprise. If you don't invest in developing talent within your family, then you won't have those leaders at the end of the day. But the notion that these two can actually be harmonized is very interesting. A lot of my colleagues talked about another dilemma, which is the balance between tradition and innovation. Good family companies are able to come up with a synthesis of that. Italcementi, I'm sure, if you just on the words I've heard, the little research I've done on your history, suggests that you have been excellent at that. You've been able to keep going and yet embrace innovation in a way that doesn't betray who you are. That I think is essential. Another dilemma is managing for the long term while being extremely agile and tactical in the short term. How do you manage that balance? How do you manage the commitment to the future generations that you spoke so eloquently about, while at the same time understanding that you are a temporary custodial of the wealth you inherit and that your job is to pass it on better than you received it. So that's the concept. And that concept changes our notion of what ownership is. So the ownership of the enterprise is no longer a thing that you own, like you would own a car, or like you own a TV set or a commodity. It is a privilege that you've inherited, that then you have to invest to earn it and then pass it on to your next generation. It's that mindset, again, that allows you to synthesize this notion of continuity while still innovating and changing, which I think is very much at the core. Now, the final point I will make, I think my colleague from Abu Dhabi, Shaika? Thoughts regarding philanthropic entrepreneurship. And one of the things that I find that is really essential is we love in the Western world for sure to celebrate individuals. You know, just yesterday I was walking around your cemetery in Milan, which I highly recommend for those of you who are from out of town. It doesn't sound like going to a cemetery would be the kind of thing you would do when you're visiting, but in fact it was a fantastic experience. And one of the things that grabbed my attention was that how many family mausoleums there are, that the power of family ties is so strong that we invest tremendous energy in keeping our dead together, even after they're gone. And one of the things that caught my attention there as well was that when that power of family gets activated in service of wealth creation, it creates a kind of conditions that really motivate people well beyond what incentives that have to do with monetary rewards are able to do. So, for example, we have found in micro lending programs, that it isn't just lending to the women, and women are better at paying back the money than men are. It's also taking into account that the women most often are working not just for themselves, but for their kids and for their grandkids. They have a sense of continuity in the chain that makes familial motivation very powerful. I was taken, for example, on a study on what's called the bamboo network. It turns out that the biggest source of foreign capital, private foreign capital that's fueling the growth of China, is all of the family members of the Chinese expatriate community that has relatives back in China is one of the biggest sources of foreign capital in China. And that's not coincidence. It's the family ties being activated in service of the development and deployment of capital that in itself is fueling growth. So I think we are just at the very beginning of understanding the role that family plays in a global world in terms of incentivizing economic growth and indeed cultural development. So let me pause there. I've already probably extended my time, but then we'll come back if there are questions.
Grazie.